Games are often at their core ridiculous. From the modern day with soldiers regenerating their health in a blink, to the past of Marines running faster than cars drove, wielding an arsenal large enough to make a Texan think twice. But in those days, games were admittedly primitive, at least to outsiders. Quake may have been a technical marvel in 1996, but to the uninitiated, it still resembled Lego Men in Trent Reznor's Dreamscape. But games embraced their artifice, leaving aspects that could be rendered to be filled by our imagination, wandering through the world developers created, while they focused entirely on the mechanics, turning artifice into an art form. And outside of the early arcade classics and Tony Hawk games, the best demonstration of this was the 90s to early 2000s craze: arena shooters. From lightning guns and Doom Marines to inflating warriors and floating castles in space, the arena shooter subgenre was a delicious cocktail of speed, skill, and laughs. They were as much about challenging yourself and growing in confidence as they were about doing as you pleased. These games didn't care about plausibility or realism. They were about embracing the wickedness of gaming, squeezing as much enjoyment out of it as possible. But times changed. We crave something else. Characters once imagined began to resemble us in our behaviors. Fidelity created new possibilities, and skill and player growth was proven to be effective in titles that didn't have you jumping and strafing at the speed of a rocket. Games experimented with context, believability, and immersion. Appearing to be trapped in the past, the arena shooter was left to those who had never exchanged its insanity for the world. But with time, the old has become the new, and the arena shooter is back. The speed, skill, and insanity has seemingly returned, with the technology of today combined with the gameplay of the past. But while all of this footage may look similar, the three games seen are very different. Plus, the arena shooter subgenre encompasses so many different styles of gameplay, from the purity of a 1v1 duel in CPMA to the large-scale assault modes in UT. Today, we'll be examining each of these new games, beginning with the new, following a legend, and concluding with purity. Unreal Tournament was hardly the fastest shooter in its market. It may have even been relatively sluggish when compared to those who spent their time fragging on Quake or Tribes. But UT was built on accessibility, flexibility, and providing an experience enjoyable for all players, regardless of preference. Lawbreakers is not Unreal Tournament, and those expecting it to be because of one of its developers, they're going to be disappointed. Lawbreakers is laser-focused in its priorities. If Unreal Tournament is about building an experience around just a handful of set tools, then Lawbreakers is about navigating a fixed environment with a selection of tools that you need to make the most out of. And it's this focus that made my brief time in the game's beta so much fun. Similar to Quake Champions, many have made the unfair comparison to Overwatch simply on the basis of it having characters that are unique in playstyle and personality. While Overwatch may have popularized Team Fortress 2's emphasis on memorable characters in a multiplayer FPS, the design of these characters in gameplay is far different than what Lawbreakers attempts. In Overwatch, there are multiple characters that can't compete against others in a duel and aren't supposed to. Attackers, defenders, tanks, and healers are intrinsic to team play. This doesn't mean you can't go on a killstreak with Zenyatta or use Widowmaker on Assault. It just means that Zarya vs Mercy isn't meant to be fair. In Lawbreakers, the different roles have their obvious strengths, weaknesses, and applications depending on the map and mode. But each of the roles can stand toe-to-toe with one another. The game's balance and flow isn't achieved by giving two players equal health, damage, and speed, but two playstyles that can give anyone a run for their money, so long as you've got the skill for it. The medic in this game is just as capable on the battlefield as a vanguard or assassin. As a result, every firefight in this game is intense, not just because of your ability in shooting and movement being tested, but also the management of your powers, the objective, and what fighters enemies are using. Unlike a traditional shooter where there isn't much finesse required on part of the player to take down another, here it's a dance of destruction. Kills are satisfying because you have to work for them. Enemies are just beefy enough to ensure that your takedown wasn't a fluke, but not to the point of making your weapons feel weak. Speaking of which, nearly everything in the arsenal is wickedly savage to use. from the Vanguard's chain gun that revs like a V8 with every reload, to the Battle Medic's grenade launcher, and the Assassin's grappling hook and blade combo. But it's the movement combined with these abilities that truly sets Lawbreakers apart. The movement speed is fast for most characters by default, but in the map's core is a low gravity center capable of sending anyone higher than United. But the low gravity doesn't feel slow in the same way that it does in a majority of titles, so the action is only more kinetic and intense in these environments. It ties in with the differences in character. The Assassin or Wraith may have the speed and powers to make better use of the gravity center, but their lower health can easily lead to a Titan or Vanguard pulping them to red paste. While taking damage, others couldn't survive. Which of these is more important to you, speed or health, might vary on map, but it's very likely to be attached to the game mode that's played. Blitzball, Turf War, and Overcharge are all objective-based, with kills only meant to further your team's goals. The kills don't mean anything if you don't use the time they're respawning to capture, hold, or score. Blitzball is the most aggressive, with a mode that's similar to Call of Duty's Uplink or Halo 4's Ricochet. Only here, there's no throwing. You have to invade your enemy's base and run the ball to the goal point yourself to earn those points. It doesn't even stop there, as each ball that spawns has a limited amount of time to be scored with for either team, meaning that players who are too conservative and waste time are going to be blown up. There isn't any downtime here, as you're always under pressure to not only score, but do it as efficiently as possible. The mode's inherent aggression still leaves room for defensive strategy, with roles like the Titan being able to deliver vast amounts of splash damage with their rocket launcher, perfect for getting the drop on anyone close to the point. Turf War may be your standard domination mode on the surface, but rather than 3 points on the map being captured by both teams over and over until it's been held for a certain amount of time, here, every zone captured is a point and locks down, and every time the 3 points on the map are taken, they reset in a couple seconds, and teams have to fight for them all over again. This effectively makes each capture zone its own dynamic clock. In most domination modes, there isn't any immediate gratification, as the whole point is that you're accumulating a few points out of hundreds. But as a result, you often find yourself slowly taking zones without any pressure and sometimes payoff. But in Lawbreakers, Turf War's seemingly minor change makes it really exciting to play. Teams that are behind 6 or 7 points still have the chance to catch up due to collecting that not being out of reach. Close matches are intense, with both teams fighting for the last point that decides the victor the instant it's captured. Finally, there's Overcharge, which is arguably the most traditional. It's similar to Neutral Flag, where a battery spawns in the middle of the map and you need to take it back to your base. The twist is that the battery needs to be fully charged before it begins a 20-second countdown to granting a single point. And there's a double twist. The battery's charge doesn't reset when removed from a team's base. This means that an enemy can fully charge a battery, get wiped out, and you can steal it, take it back to your base, and instantly be within a few seconds of scoring. While this mode may not have as much time spent in the map's core due to all the action in the bases of both teams, the opportunity for stealing the objective and turning an enemy's security against them is really gratifying, and adds a lot of tension while you're holding off enemies. Being closer to earning a point is more stressful than when you started charging, and that is brilliant. The addiction that comes from this game isn't simply that it's fun. What makes you want to keep going one more match is that you know it's going to be good. Great games can still frustrate either through lag, exploits, or tedium. In some games, you need to invest in a build-up to the intense and awesome moments that are experienced later. What's great about Lawbreakers is that there isn't any downtime. Every match is a riot from the moment it starts. Learning the roles and each of their strengths on top of that is what'll keep you going. The closed beta made me excited for this game in a way that trailers weren't able to illustrate. The flow and satisfaction of Lawbreakers has enough potential to make it truly something special. Though this isn't a final assessment on the game. I was only able to spend 5 to 6 hours with the closed beta. And from what I've tried, I feel that the Gunslinger is easily the worst class in the game. His most damaging ability is very powerful, but in almost every encounter, I wish I had been a different character. This could easily be chalked up to me simply lacking the skill to use him effectively, but in my time, I don't recall being crushed by Gunslinger at any point. And while Lawbreakers is looking to be a great game, it won't be for everyone, including old-school shooter fans. If you're looking for a game that's dependent on weapon control, power-ups, and momentum, Lawbreakers only has one of those, and that's by design. The only strategic aspect of the map in regards to what they do for your character are the health stations and pickups. Due to the roles and their playstyles, having power weapons on the map or quad damage would only dampen the experience. Maps are typically built to take advantage of characters' unique movements, such as a grappling hook, This game is about what you do with the characters, and relying on pickups would cheapen that. But just like with Unreal Tournament, Lawbreakers is coming out in a time where a legend is returning. As odd as it may seem, I actually found enjoyment in Doom's multiplayer. As a mindless shoot 'em up with friends, it had enough visual flair and satisfying weapons to play with for a few hours. But it was absolutely a missed opportunity, and the announcement of Quake's return had many hoping for said opportunity to be seized upon. To truly reinvigorate the pure arena gameplay Quake was made famous for with its third installment. In terms of movement, shooting, weapons, and level design, Quake Champions does live up to being a return to form. Compared to Ed's recent output, there's something fundamentally more exhilarating about Champions. Unlike Lawbreakers, your knowledge of the levels is of greater importance to success. Not just where weapons, power, and armor pickups are, but what paths to take and how to lure enemies to where you want them. It is true that this formula isn't anything revolutionary, but it doesn't change just how much this old gameplay feels new again after being confined to either boots on the ground or jetpacks. But that doesn't mean Champions is a complete copy of Quake 3 Arena. It has further refinements that speak to the lessons learned with Quake Live. Fans rightfully reacted negatively to that game's attempt to use loadouts in a game that was originally designed to have weapons operate in tiers, and again when Doom's multiplayer brought it back, needing to balance each weapon against one another, killing any potential for the cat and mouse gameplay old school shooters are known for. In Quake Champions, this opening selection is a lot more reasonable. You select between a machine gun, shotgun, or nail gun, but these are weaker versions of the actual weapons you can pick up on the map. It's not a bad compromise, but I personally never found a reason to select anything other than the machine gun. The starting shotgun runs out of ammo very quickly, and the nail gun is my least favorite weapon in the game already, so a weaker version is hardly compelling. But your greatest selection in this opening screen isn't your weapon, it's your champion. This has been the most controversial element of this new Quake, because while the core gameplay and the act of moving and shooting feels undeniably like it deserves a franchise name, the introduction of characters with varying health, armor, speed, and abilities could potentially ruin the purity Quake 3 was known for, particularly among its hardcore fans involved in the pro mod CPMA. But I believe the champions and what they bring is more complex than yay or nay. I spent time with each of the 9 champions available in the beta, and what's impressive is how the developers managed to simultaneously make each feel unique and feel while retaining Quake's gameplay and all. There aren't any in the roster that feel like they don't belong in the arena. Differences in character and playstyle isn't nearly as drastic as Lawbreakers. The variations are more subtle, with slight differences to your health pool and movement. Being that I'm always on speed, I have a preference for it in games, which had me defaulting to Nyx. But that speed only matters if your skill level is able to surpass your opponent. In the event it doesn't, you pay the price with less health and a greater potential to be insta-jibbed by a direct rocket or railgun shot from someone who can aim. But because the differences in characters aren't as drastic, I couldn't find any scenarios where I'd give up in a fight. There aren't any characters that you find yourself hopeless against regardless of selection. In free-for-all and team deathmatch, the champions actually bring an element of management that hasn't been seen in the franchise. Previously, every character was just a skin. Whether they were Sarge, Doomguy, or a monstrosity, they were ultimately the same enemy you had to overcome. In Champions, you're keeping track of pickups, powers, locations, and enemies, like always. But now you need to take into account the variables of each character on top of those. Killing one enemy and moving to another with tangible differences makes the battles more exciting and more mentally stimulating than running into another with the exact same stats. It adds tension to deathmatch games, and Champions is a blast in these playlists, with friends or in solo. But while the Champions bring a positive element in deathmatch, they take away in duel and sacrifice modes. While Quake may have the reputation as a hardcore and competitive shooter, I believe that mostly stems from QuakeCon and CPMA, the awesome pro mod that had the best of the best pulling off amazing feats. Quake 3 Arena itself wasn't that extreme. It had bots that teach new players, some maps being flatter than cardboard, and a knack for the over-the-top explosive casual fun. I believe Champions is after that same goal, and the Champions themselves only further that dynamic, explosive, and fun gameplay in deathmatch. But in Duel, the game attempts to set itself up as that hardcore experience, and it doesn't really work. The mode does attempt to bring some interest with the champions in a 1v1 setting, where you and an opponent take turns drafting characters that the other then can't select. But the levels are clearly meant for multiple players, as do the champions. While the abilities add both visual flair and tactical assessments in FFA and TDM, in Duel, they feel like a candy bar in a buffet. With the maps being made for 8 to 12 players, 1v1s feel empty and static. Most of the time is spent hunting each other down or running around to abuse pickups your enemy can't possibly prevent. Pickups are slightly altered in location to make the duel mode a little more enticing, yet it just can't ever shake the feeling that the game wasn't designed for it. But the champions run into the most issues in Sacrifice. This mode attempts to combine King of the Hill, CTF, and Neutral Flag all into one. In this mode, there are 2 pillars on the map and a soul that spawns in the middle. Once a player has taken the soul to one of the pillars, it makes that one your team's, and the opposite your enemy's. This soul needs to reach 100% before it can be consumed, and 1 point for the team is earned. At any time, an enemy can steal it, take it to their base, and do the same thing. That actually sounds rather familiar, but not only does Quake do a far worse job of explaining the mode's objectives than Lawbreakers' Overcharge, it doesn't fit within Champion's gameplay for multiple reasons. Issues aren't so much to do with running or stealing the objective, it's in defending it. Quake's built around movement and map control, so to have a mode where the bulk of playtime is spent restricting yourself to one corner of the map, holding off enemies coming in, feels very antithetical to the game's strengths. Much more so than the inclusion of character-specific abilities. Moreover, the weaker champions become effectively useless. The Soul Carrier can't use their abilities without first disposing of it, and using a character with less strength and a base with few pickups is pointless. As a result, everyone uses Sorlag, Clutch, and Scalebearer, which kills the dynamic that the champions bring to Deathmatch. But these issues aren't ones that can't be rectified. 1v1s could get smaller levels, and with people having to use the same champions against one another, and Sacrifice can dampen its emphasis on defending and in turn give more reason to use all the champions, as well as utilize Quake's flow because it really does shine here. Quake Champions has its issues. Non-deathmatch modes haven't impressed, the nail gun isn't great, Sorlag's overpowered, sound effects don't have the impact of Doom, and new players can still find themselves being crushed due to the lack of a ranking system, currently. But by God is this game a blast. I watch those who assume they'd hate the abilities laugh maniacally upon crushing their enemies with Scalebearer's charge. Chaining railgun kills gives a shot of adrenaline with every hit, and I couldn't help but fall in love every time I fell into the groove of blitzing through maps with my main, thrilled for my next kill. Quake Champions, or more accurately, Quake Deathmatch, is a riot, and it's a ray of hope. Not only for reviving the Quake brand, but delivering a new arena shooter with the resources that it's always deserved. But as discussed, Quake 3 didn't actively pursue the hardcore market, and neither does Champions. So what are those fans supposed to do? What if you want to skip the abilities, characters, and skins of these arena shooters? What if you want the purity that's been lost to the ages? Well, ever since 2014, there's been a solution. Reflex is Quake Unplugged. If Champions is a commercial vehicle, then Reflex is a racer. And much like owning a racing tuned machine, it has very little to comfort you. Now, with that said, since I purchased it during the launch onto Steam's Early Access program, Reflex does include training, efficiently teaching you all of the game's mechanics in a way that's far more enjoyable than most tutorials. Controls are never taken away, and you're never given a set example. So rather than following orders, you're actually learning. You can even explore the levels further to collect hidden tokens, or get the fastest time possible and add it to the leaderboards. It concludes with bot matches that give you a feel for the pacing of combat. But unfortunately, the AI is not nearly developed enough to replicate gameplay as in larger titles like Unreal Tournament or Quake 3. This means that you'll mostly be learning from experience. And boy is it ever one. Despite effectively copying CPMA from 17 years ago, it's a style of gameplay that hasn't been replicated since, and as a result, feels unique to this day. In fact, according to the wiki, a brand new engine needed to be built in order to support the mechanics and speed properly. That's not meant to suggest that the game hasn't improved from CPMA. It's a much smoother experience in Quake 3's Pro Mod, with much needed refinements that are hard to live without once felt. Where Arena felt floaty, Reflex feels precise. Something as simple as the air control that allows you to change direction without a surface quickly feels as effortless as breathing. Timing rocket or double jumps may take a bit longer, but the movement system has a consistency to it that, once mastered, adds a momentum and flow that's addicting, if only because, unlike most modern attempts, you really need to work for it here. The gameplay itself is unmatched in terms of sheer speed, but in design, will make Quake players feel right at home. Everything from the different stages of health and armor pickups to the weapons has barely changed. The shotgun, grenade launcher, rocket launcher, bolt rifle. Some of the names and visuals may have been altered, but everything from Quake V's weapons has been retained. Except when it comes to the lowest tiers. Rather than a machine gun and gauntlet, you start with a burst gun and melee weapon. This may seem like a minor change, but it's one of the few cases where I disagree with the game's objective of providing a high level of play. I've never had someone call me a filthy casual for earning a gauntlet kill, or said that machine guns are for scrubs. Quake's gameplay, casually or professionally, engages both with its flow. The machine gun and gauntlet were a product of that. You didn't need to think about leading shots immediately after spawning or to time your melee kills for a perfect hit. You just held the mouse down and pursued whomever was unfortunate enough to have a blade lodged between their teeth. While the burst gun and melee weapons are in sync with a high level of play and earning your kills with precise aim and skill, I feel that the flow is much more important, and that the skill level of the machine gun or gauntlet isn't so low that it'd negate the level of play in Reflex. But that's a minor point, as the bulk of playtime is spent with weapons like the ion cannon, bolt rifle, or rocket launcher. But far more important than the weapons, and what separates Reflex the most from Quake Champions and Lawbreakers, are the levels. These are tightly designed, small-scale, intense arenas with a multitude of jumps, shortcuts, and choke points you'll memorize within a few battles. The best levels in the game facilitate the cat-and-mouse gameplay I mentioned previously. While 2v2's FFAs and tournament modes are a blast here, this game's bread and butter are the duels. Unlike Champions, where the levels felt empty in 1v1s, here, it's a battle of wills from start to finish. There isn't a shooter in existence that hits the white-knuckle intensity of a fight in Reflex. Some duels have players duking it out for as long as 3 minutes before one of them falls. And it's never dull, as both players are on a knife edge for every second of that period. It's not uncommon for tables to turn here, where the hunter is pursuing its prey, only for the hunted to land their hits and have the tables turn within seconds. It's exhilarating, no matter which side you're on. The arena mutator that has players taking turns with the victor facing the queue until they finally go down and are put back in line is just as fun. Rounds are either lightning fast or an intense tug-of-war, as the two are in as much of a mental duel as they are in a gunfight. Every death only has you realizing what could have been done to avoid it, and in turn, makes you eager to go again. And waiting isn't a pain, because the game is so much fun to watch that sitting in line isn't a hassle, and the game takes advantage of it. It's been released with a map editor and a public list that allows you to try from a virtually endless selection. There's even a built-in spectator mode that lets you view matches between the best players in the game that's accurate, fast, and intense to watch with pro players combating at the highest level. Reflex even surprises outside of the game itself with its community. Shooters in general are known for its attraction of the immature whose only means of communicating is telling you how much they enjoy bending over your mom. I've even experienced recently in the mostly forgotten Quake Live with players telling you to change character skins because of unfair hitboxes, even if they're already crushing you. I can only speak from my own experience, but every match with Reflex has been overwhelmingly positive. I've had players utterly destroy me, then give tips for the map and weapons, and congratulate on my occasional outplays. People genuinely commenting on a good game even if they lost. Setting up team games when possible due to rarity. I've only encountered people who want to further this game and improve people's time with it. Because while Reflex has the matchmaking, maps, weapons, spectating, streaming, features, and gameplay to be an amazing title, it's missing the most important piece of all. The purity that many clamor for is hard to come by in gaming today, not just because of the overwhelming budgets of modern titles or the emphasis on marketing and appealing to as many demographics as possible, but simply because to get the full enjoyment out of the purest arena shooters takes investment. Time spent mastering the gameplay, learning levels, and overcoming the times you get crushed repeatedly. I was lucky. Friends of my experience and skill level were intrigued by Reflex and took over lobbies with me to frag for hours. Those who purchased Reflex alone, looking for something to experience, weren't able to get anything because the time required for getting a game going and progressing in skill at a satisfying pace was too far out of reach in their limited schedule. I'm not a master of arena shooters. In fact, I am the casual. I am the exact sort of player that may be turned off by Reflex's pro mod, hardcore-inspired gameplay. and going through hell just to lose, or taking time not to earn a new weapon or cool skin, but to become competent at the game itself. But in a time where Lawbreakers and Quake champions are looking to deliver such an awesome experience for fast, bloody, and chaotic objective and deathmatch combat, and are reopening a subgenre thought to be dead, Reflex's lack of exposure and attention is a tragedy. The niche that wants this genre back more than anyone else has a game that delivers everything needed for the casual and hardcore player, and it's not being played. But even in its current state, I believe it's absolutely one of the best on the market, and a title that deserves your attention regardless of what player you are. Even if it's just a 4-pack played exclusively with friends, it is absolute bliss. Getting a taste of Lawbreakers and Quake champions, and fragging on Reflex, has me excited for the future. Whereas the genre had the era of take what you can get, it has, for the first time in a while, been presented with variety and choice. For those who loved arena shooters, there is an experience for you. For those who've never played it, there's an experience for you. Regardless of which you are, keep your eyes on Lawbreakers and Quake. Play Reflex, get your industrial playlist, and immerse yourself in the beauty of artifice. Recently, a milestone on my channel was passed, reaching 100,000 subscribers. I've been making YouTube content for 10 years, and I never thought that I would hit this milestone, let alone within such a short amount of time. You guys really are the best. Whether you're a subscriber, a Patreon supporter, or a follower on Twitter, I'm eternally grateful, and I really can't thank you guys enough. Is it true that there's a place on a man's head that if you shoot it, will explode? I don't know, let's find out. Who is your favorite author? Cory Doctorow. Not because I've read a ton of his books, I haven't. But he's my favorite author because he's the one that showed my idiot teenage self that books can be entertaining. Favorite Metal Gear? Metal Gear Solid 3. Why is this even a question? How did you come up with your YouTube name? I got lazy. At one point I was actually debating whether to use Craven or Raycevick. I think I went with the right choice. Favorite weapon from any game? It'd have to come down to a tie between the Halo 2 energy sword or sniper rifle. Ah, good times.
Wow, we had no fucking sniper rifle on this map.
Favorite game of all time? Probably Gran Turismo 2, simply because that was my first video game ever, and spent countless hours on. Are we ever going to see Mario? Years later. Probably not. Who's your favorite Patreon supporter? Well, it absolutely has to be. On the night you reached 100,000 subscribers, did you dream of 100,000 ducks or 100,000 chickens? Definitely chickens, specifically ones in the oven.
Bro, get up, I got chicken. Where, nigga?
What is your favorite genre of music and what are your favorite artists in it? Industrial or electronic rock or whatever you want to call it. Two of my favorite artists in anything, let alone this genre, are Clayton and Trent Reznor. Do you play any instruments yourself? No, but I do have Guitarsmith installed on my computer and a guitar waiting for me. So maybe that'll change in the future. Does a submarine swim? Sure.